Okay, so welcome everybody. I've been struggling with this car, the new HB D2 Evo, for a little over a week. I was supposed to go racing this weekend at Carpet Clash, but decided to run my old car instead, because this car, since I built it, I've had an issue with the rear diff. And I'm not the only person who's discovered this. One of the guys I race with, same problem. Some of the other guys that race here reported the same issues. But nobody can really pinpoint exactly what it is. And I wasn't prepared to run the car until I could find out what this issue is. And the issue is that the rear diff binds. So you can see the diff now is really smooth, right? Spins really freely. At the moment I've got two dots in here. I've got a 2-dot eccentric bearing and it's 2 dots up. But here's something interesting. This isn't the problem, this is just something else I discovered. If I take this, so you can hear now, super smooth, right? Take it out, flip it around, so it's 2 dots down now. So the 2 dots at the bottom. Nothing else has changed, just done that. Listen to that. And it's not because I haven't got the bulkhead on and it's not centralized. It is centralized, right? I can show you the same thing with it screwed on top. So that tells me that these eccentric bushings, especially on the 2-dot one, 2-dot up or down, this eccentric holder is a molding issue. When you run it with the dots up, meshing is great. When you run it with the dots down, it grates and binds. But that's not the binding issue that I'm talking about. This is just something else that I found, right? There you can hear it again. Now I'm going to swap it around. Dots at the top. I don't know if you can see that. But now the dots are going to go at the top, right? The way it was. You'll notice that it also fits into the diff easier that way. Now all of a sudden, silky smooth, free as a bird. The issue, this is just the second issue I picked up. The main issue is this, right? When you push the bulkhead down and I tighten it up, I haven't tightened it tight, so I'm just doing it in a cross pattern like you should do. Just nipping it up. You'll see that the diff goes tight again. And this is freer than what it is with the 1-dot. But you'll see as soon as you tighten it down, diff goes tight, creating friction. One of the guys we raced with on the weekend, when they came off the track, diff was super hot. You can see how it starts binding, and it also feels uneven. It's not meshing evenly anymore. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to back off these 4 screws and just tighten the 2 front ones. And I'm going to show you something at the back. So I don't know if you can see this. Sometimes it battles to get focus, right? But over here, you'll see there's a slight gap between the top bulkhead and the bottom bulkhead. And as soon as I tighten that up, it'll probably go out of focus now as I do it. But as soon as I tighten that up, you'll see that gap at the back closes. So now it's already nipped up to the aluminium on the top here. The nut is, or the bolt is already nipped up against there. As soon as I tighten, as soon as that happens, I can still turn it another half a turn, and you can see that gap close at the back, which means this bulkhead is not seated on the bottom bulkhead. And when you tighten these screws down, it's pinching the diff, and then the diff goes tight. So now the diff's tight again, right? So I've been trying to understand what this is and why it does it. Because it's not just one or two people. There's a few people who have complained about this. And I've spent quite a few hours taking this diff in and out. I mean, these screws are almost worn out. It's probably been in and out 40 times already, easily. So what I first thought it was that these bulkheads aren't machined deep enough over here. They're not machined deep enough on this outer lip and the inner lip. And when you tighten it down, you saw the gap at the back. As soon as you tighten it down, it's crimping these eccentric bushings, right? Causing the diff to bind. But I've had a deeper look at this problem. And one thing I noticed when I take the bulkheads in and out is that on these little corners, they're really wearing out. The car hasn't even been driven, hasn't been raced. But these little end points are something which are already wearing out. They've already gone silver. So what I tried to do is just lightly push over here, not on the outer race, but on the inner race and these eccentric bushings, right? So on this outside one over here, not the inside one. If I just push lightly over there, so now it's spinning freely. If I just push lightly over there, you'll see that it starts tightening up again. There. If I go to that point and I push in there, it goes tight. If I push in there, same thing. It goes tight. Not as bad. Mainly seems to be this one over here and that one over there for some reason. And that might be because these eccentric bushings, you saw when I took it out and ran 2 dots up versus 2 dots down, the meshing's not right and the gearbox sounds really bad, right? It seems to be more pronounced. Definitely on this back end over there, it goes tight. And there, it's an extra fact, it's this one and this one over here. As soon as I push something in there, it goes tight. Weird. And what I think it is these two little points. When you push them into the diff, I think they're crimping on the outside of the bearings, on those bushings, the eccentric bearings. It's pushing on either side and it's crimping it. So I'm not prepared to do it because these things cost a lot of money, right? But I'm tempted just to taper a little bit of that aluminium off over here on the outside, and maybe even take off the point just so that it doesn't pinch that bushing. But a quick fix, I thought, well, let me just test the theory, right? So I race 1/8 scale, and I've got some normal clutch shims. These are 0.1 millimeter shims. Just 0.1, like very, very thin, paper thin almost. I tried it with it on all 4 corners. But what I found was if I just put it on these two over here, and I tighten this down, there seems to be a massive improvement. So guys, that's just 0.1 millimeters, right? It's not that thick. I'd like to try a 0.2 because I think a 0.2 will make it even freer. So I mean, I haven't tightened those down tight. I'm just nipping it up. Okay, and then I'll nip it up. There, there, and there. And you can see now, spinning free. Just by putting a 0.1 millimeter shim on the front of the bulkhead, alleviates that pinching. Either on the back or the front, wherever it's pinching, it seems to be alleviating it. It doesn't solve the problem that these bushings seem to be molded wrong. Well, they're not exactly very accurate, because as soon as I flip it from 2 dots up to 2 dots down, the meshing, you heard it, it just grinds. It's not great. Doesn't seem to be an issue with a point or with a 1 dot. I don't know if you can see. Initially, I thought it was that the CNC machining inside this bulkhead was not good, or they didn't recess it enough. So when it was tightening down, it was tightening down on the outside of this bushing and crimping the bearing and creating friction. So I actually took one of these and I dremeled it down with like a soft carbide bit, just on a low speed, just a soft carbide bit on a low speed. And I just dremeled it ever so lightly. I mean, I probably took off about 1 millimeter on the top, 1 millimeter on the bottom, and a 1/2 mil just over there, top and bottom. And it still doesn't solve the issue, which leads me to believe it's those 4 points, or those 4 pins. When you push it down, they seem to be crimping this thing, because now you can see super smooth. Just pop that drive shaft in, free as a bird. It'll probably be even freer if I put a 0.2 mil shim in there, but I mean, that you could easily live with, right? So yeah guys, I've spent a good few hours trying to understand what this issue is, and it's definitely a molding issue. 1, on these bushings, and number 2, somewhere on these bulkheads. The other thing I'd like to mention is, since I've been building this car and spending so much time looking at some of these issues, it reminds me of my old on-road cars, my on-road racing days, right? Because this car has got a pretty cool system with the aluminium bulkheads in the rear. It reminds me of the on-road cars where you've got your top plate that screws on. But what it immediately reminded me of is when we race on-road, you constantly have problems with tweak, and you've got to put it on a board and loosen your screws and your bulkheads to get the chassis straight. So what I would recommend you do is, before you tighten these 4 bolts down, is back off your 4 screws on your shock tower. Because this shock tower, when I've backed it off, I'll show you, it doesn't 100% self-align, right? If you can see that, it rocks from side to side, up and down. So if you happen to screw this on skew and then screw it down, there's a potential that you could tweak this or add some extra pressure there. I don't know. So I would recommend, if you take this top bulkhead off, right, just back off these 4 screws on your shock tower, and then once you've tightened the bulkhead down, just press in the center like we used to with the on-road cars. Just press down in the middle, just to get it centralized, and then nip it up, just to make sure there's no tweak in that bulkhead. If you want to go one step further, I tried it as well, just to try and solve the issue, was to back off your 4 screws, or the 6 screws actually, on the bulkhead on the bottom, just to give it a little bit of give, to make sure that the top plate aligns properly, and then tighten these 6 screws down, and then tighten your 4 screws up on the shock tower, and then that you'll make sure there's no tweak or misalignment on the rear bulkheads. But guys, if you've got this issue where your gearbox is binding up, or you haven't really noticed it, but your gearbox, when you come off the track and you feel on the bottom, on the sides, and it's really hot, much hotter than some of the other guys, I can pretty much guarantee you it'll be because of this issue. Then just do this little trick I showed you now. If you're running on dirt and you're worried about that 0.1 millimeter gap, it's so tiny, guys, I doubt anything's going to get in there. But if you really wanted to, you could probably put a little bit of lithium grease or copper grease or something that's a bit thicker inside there, just to cover that minuscule gap, to try and keep some dirt out. But we run on carpet, so I'm not too worried about that. I hope it was helpful, guys. Give it a bash, let me know.